Astonishing scenes in Russia where the Wagner group, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, have marched on their own people. They've come out of Ukraine. They've been fighting in the third city of Donbass, Bakhmut, where Prigozhin says that his forces have suffered terrible losses. He blames Kremlin incompetence and he's marched on Russia. We now think he's gone from the city of Rostov, where he says he's taken control. We've seen his soldiers invading Russian military buildings. He went to Voronezh, where we've seen explosions. An oil refinery seems to have gone up. And we now hear that the Wagner group, 25,000 of them, are marching towards Moscow, and they are within 50 miles of the Russian capital. Meanwhile, machine gun posts are going up all around Moscow to protect the city. Putin has made a very nervous, frightened kind of a speech, talking about treachery, treason, and being stabbed in the back. It is a tinderbox situation, and the world is holding its breath. Most people think that within 24, 48 hours, we'll be looking at a very, very difficult and different situation in the East. In the studio, Russian relations expert Euan Grant joins me. Thank you for joining us, Euan. Your take on this situation? You and I were just talking off air. Nobody expected that. I didn't, but then again, I'm not an expert. But this has come as a surprise to you as well?
Yes, indeed, and I think most others in the field. He was going very close to the wire in his criticisms of the
This is Prigozhin, yeah.
Prigozhin, yeah. But I still took the view, and I know that's held by people who've been on the ground in the last years and months and weeks in Moscow and in Ukraine, that this was still with the approval of Putin to keep the army in check, given the discrediting of the FSB for fouling up the assessments about the success of an invasion. And it seems that he's decided perhaps to take his chance, and Putin must be very, very worried that this was not picked up, which suggests a degree of collusion or complicity within the regular army.
Yes, I mean, it's really, really remarkable that the Wagner group, 25,000 apparently, you know, the speed of their advance towards Moscow has been breathtaking, and they're now within 50 miles. And the suspicion is that Prigozhin has got allies in the Kremlin, and he is marching unopposed.
Well, certainly, I mean, I'd like to see the reconnaissance photos, which at that distance from the border, Voronezh is fairly close to the Ukrainian border, so there may well be certain assets which can see the situation in the highway and railway around Voronezh. But of course, if they're that close to Moscow, then that we're relying on satellites. I'd like a bit of corroboration on that, but exactly, and it is a bit like perhaps an unfortunate parallel, 2003 in Iraq, where after certain clashes, it was then largely an unopposed march to Baghdad and then fighting on the outskirts of Baghdad. I think Putin must be really, really worried. And I thought your comments at the beginning in introduction really caught a thing which needs to be shouted from the rooftop. He looked very defensive in his broadcast, didn't he? He was not confident.
Well, you see, you're saying, you know, as I say, it's certainly unexpected to me, but I'm not an expert. But it's interesting that you found it so unexpected, and it struck me that it came as a complete shock to Putin as well, and that is a really telling sign of some kind of disintegration.
It's worth remembering that although Surovikin, the de facto commander of the operation in Ukraine, because although Gerasipov is the titular commander, well, he is anyway as chief of the general staff. Now, he produced a video calling on loyalty to President Putin, but he has been known in the past to be somewhat sympathetic to Wagner. And, of course, they are both, or at least their organisations, are what you might call Syrianiski, like the Afghansky network of Afghan veterans
Oh, right, yeah.
in the 1980s. Well, Surovikin was in charge in Syria, and of course Wagner was in Syria, and that is a key outlet to the outside world for what happens, legitimate and mainly illegitimate, after Putin and indeed after Prigozhin.
Tell us a bit about Prigozhin. We've been looking at video of him swearing away, shouting, screaming, where's the weapons? He feels clearly very betrayed about what has happened in Bakhmut. But he's a frightening character. The Wagner group are a frightening military force, are notorious for their ruthlessness, their violence around the world, particularly in Africa. Don't forget, they don't just fight in the Ukraine. We should be worried about this Prigozhin guy.
I don't think we should be panicking at this stage, but we certainly should be worried. The obvious thing is, would he go tactical nuclear if he got power? But of course, if he's reliant on the regular army or certain elements perhaps within the Kremlin who are now hedging their bets, most of them won't want to go tactical nuclear either, because they know what the Chinese will say.
And what about Putin? As I keep saying, you know, a rat is dangerous, a cornered rat can be lethal. We've always heard that, you know, despite the fact it's all very well to say, oh, Putin's mad, he's bonkers and all that, but he's not insane, I don't think. However, in his desperation, do you think he might press the button?
I don't think so, no. I think he's still got people around him who would at the end say, you are completely on your own. If you do that. So
what's going to happen with him, though? If support ebbs away, if he loses all of his support, what will happen to him?
I can't see him committing suicide. I can't see him doing an Adolf Hitler. And I think it would look too obvious that he was shot while trying to escape. I think they would round up him and his few really close loyalists, try and turn the loyalists, many of whom, of course, are the securitocrats, oligarchs, not the oligarchs, but the one, people like Sechin and so on, and they would do a deal. I mean, we've seen this before all the time. Look what happened after the fall of Napoleon. Most of his followers went over to the other side and then changed back a year later. We saw this with a remarkable number of the Nazis.
Tell us about the Russian people. What will they be feeling about? I mean, how much of this will they be actually being told? Will they know about this? But on the basis that perhaps they do, how will they be reacting to this? Have they had enough of Putin?
I think probably, certainly that's the case of Moscow and Petersburg, and that will be a real shock. I understand that Wagner's imposing HQ in St. Petersburg, which is, of course, Putin and Prigozhin's spiritual and physical home, have been surrounded. It's come home to the St. Petersburg people. It's also, of course, now, from what you've been reporting and highlighting, come home in Moscow. I think that's the crucial difference now. The great mass along the Volga, the Urals, Siberia, they're still largely kept in the dark. Not much impact there. But it's Moscow and Petersburg that are key.
Putin, this endeavour, the Ukraine invasion, the war on Ukraine, I mean, it has been a massive miscalculation, has it not, on the part of Vladimir Putin? Why was he so wrong?
Paranoia and megalomania and the culture, which has always been in the Russian system, I mean, it was still around in the quasi-democratic years of the 90s. The Soviet era had developed a system of pure fear. You don't question the boss.
Right.
And therefore he was told
what he wanted to hear. So often the boss is the last one to know what's going on. Yes, and that's indeed probably what we're talking about.
It's a massive intelligence failure, but it's a failure of integrity and organisation, because the FSB knew perfectly well that there would be resistance.
Final question, I'm asking everyone this. Is it a fair assessment that we could be seeing the beginning of the end, not only for Vladimir Putin? I presume if Vladimir Putin falls, then we see the beginning of the end of the Ukraine war. Is that fair?
The beginning of the end, but that could be still a long way. Perhaps we should say, to paraphrase Churchill, and you know what I'm going to say now, this is the end of the beginning.
Very good. Euan, thank you so much for coming in. That was Euan Grant, Russian relations expert.